Doesn't mean that you can't make an incredibly successful company, but it does mean that it's probably quite unlikely that you will create a kind of cultural icon unicorn.
This one's for the disruptors, the uncommon, the unconventional, the rebels. You're not here to take things lying down. Well, season 2 is about shaking things up. I'm Beatrice, and this is the Art of Branding podcast. Be ready, be badass. Let's shake some shit up. I'm not going to fangirl again. Okay, never mind. This is happening. Today's guest is one of the few people that continue to inspire me. Alex is the author of No Bullshit Strategy, founder of Basic Arts, and he's all about the idea that, well, if strategy could instead be clear, simple, bold, and actually useful, aka no damn bullshit, can we get a little fist raise for that? Like, seriously, that message, incredible. Anyway, Alex, you've written many pieces, like The Fall of My English has decided to just fail on me. And the piece about Adam and Eve taking advantage of competition. Honestly, there's so many intriguing pieces that you've written up. And there's one that just popped up for me. The one that you wrote about authenticity, Nickelback, Starbucks.
Oh, yeah.
And the power of inauthenticity. See, I told you my English is just failing. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
The power of inauthenticity. Yeah, well, thanks for the intro for me. I hate having to do my own intro.
Yeah, no.
This is something that actually means a lot to me because it's what I'm trying to do with my own business. You get a lot of people, a lot of businesses, a lot of advice telling you how good it is to be authentic and how important it is to be authentic. And obviously, you know, you can cut this different ways. And I think it's good to be a sort of authentic person. But from a business perspective, there are obviously some businesses out there who really represent the very authentic expression of their market, whether it's whiskey or like running shoes or whatever, you know. Every market has got its core, it's got its aficionados, it's got the real sort of high quality, pure version of that thing. And then on the outside, you've got all the sort of the crap versions of that thing. But I think what the best brands do is they take the elements of the pure thing and they basically dumb them down and they package them for the masses. So the reason that I conflate Nickelback and Starbucks is that if you think what Nickelback did with metal, Starbucks did with coffee, they took just enough of the real thing and then they kind of made it much more accessible and they then sold it to millions and millions of people. What do coffee snobs say about Starbucks? Well, they say the same thing that metal fans say about Nickelback, right? In both cases, they hate them. But ultimately, who's laughing and what is the more successful business / more successful band? You know, Slayer or Nickelback? That an authentic Italian roastery or Starbucks? So if you can just, you know, really get that kind of like inauthenticity right, and you can dumb down, water down something pure, that I think is where the real money is to be made, when you're skirting on the edge of the authentic market and you're just like opening it up to a bigger group of people.
Sounds like a very fine balance to have, right? Like without appealing to too many like people or being too wide, rather than like, okay, so say for example, like, you know, these other ones like Slayer, etc. Like it's very direct. Or like the Italian roastery, like it's like, okay, we're very much like, I don't know, like Nespresso, right? Like it's a very direct one.
I've never thought about it this deeply. I've sort of what I gave you was my whole as deeply as I've ever thought about it. But now that you're sort of like pushing me on the matter,
it's good.
Yes, it is a delicate balance to strike. And I think, okay, the Nickelback thing's just sort of like being is just an analogy, but if we think about it from more of a sort of business perspective, what you tend to get here is these tend to be sort of mass premium options. So the way that you don't, so if you think about like, there is Starbucks, right, is mass coffee, but it's not crap coffee. It's mass premium.
Mm.
Nespresso is mass premium too. Another good example of a brand who does this is Jack Daniels, right? So Jack Daniels is like not amazing whiskey, but it's not like shit whiskey. So it isn't about making something cheap. That is the low end of the market. Your instant coffee, whatever, your crap coffee, that existed long before Starbucks. What Starbucks did is what you have to do is, right, you have to give the people who are consuming the crap thing, you have to make them feel like this is a luxury purchase. Like, oh, this is really good coffee. Oh, well, Jack Daniels is really good whiskey, right? So you've got to think about it from the point of view of the person who's at the bottom of the market and they want to upgrade. So the product is always going to be a premiumization play, right? Because what you're not going to get is you're not going to get the real whiskey drinker coming to Jack Daniels. They just want to sit in there sort of like on their whiskey forums online and say what shit slop Jack Daniels is. So that's another error that people make because they think they want to appeal to the people who really want the pure source. But no, actually what you want to do is you want to lift up the people who are consuming the shit. And so this is what I want to do with my business with strategy, because like the thing is, I'm not interested in talking to like, Harvard Business Review, or where, let's say for sake of argument, they already understand all of it and that's great, fine for them. What I'm interested in is in the 99.9% of businesses out there who don't understand strategy, don't even try to do strategy, and they're just making these stupid decisions and they're fighting an uphill battle without even realizing how easy it would be to overcome it. Those are your instant coffee drinkers, right? And so I just want to give them a Starbucks. I don't want to give them the full-blown Italian thing because it's completely unnecessary. Starbucks, at the end of the day, you're going to be very, very happy with that. It tastes good and it's nicely delivered and it does the job. The same thing with no bullshit strategy.
Oh my God, I love that. But isn't that a very, I don't know, like a lot of people talk about don't target too wide of an audience, right? Like
Yeah.
to like the mass market of a certain kind of field. Is there like that balance there, like of, because you were saying like targeting the 99% of business owners who they're and like that is most business owners that like I was speaking to that like don't really get that whole like these nuances of strategy, right? Like even on like a different level, like I was talking on your post today, like about the mission, etc., and like having those different opinions. So where do you draw the line in terms of being direct but like also wide?
Sometimes, the niching that you do is not like an audience niching or a sort of a segmentation niching or whatever. It's more of a kind of vibe niching. So, like, I don't know, Liquid Death, as far as I know, doesn't have a well defined target audience, but it has a very sort of niche kind of like vibe to it. You know that it's only going to appeal to 10% of people, but you don't know who that 10% of people are. You couldn't demographically target them. You couldn't say, oh, they're people who are this age or people who live here or whatever. For me, I feel a little bit like, okay, yes, I say, all right, this is strategy for 99% of businesses, but it's going to be self-selecting by the way that I put myself out there in the world. Some people are just going to chime with my vibe and other people aren't. But I haven't actually like drawn a ring around who those people are. So like, yes, on the face of it, I could say, all right, it is young founders of businesses in the 1 million to 5 million turnover range. And in my head, that is kind of like who it is. But then when I look at like, the businesses who contact me for consultancy work, for example, they don't adhere to that pattern at all. The age of the founders can be very different. A lot of them are in the most boring, grimy B2B kind of spaces imaginable. It's not like I'm only being contacted by sort of like soft drinks and stuff like that. So like what? Why when I so then I think about like why would I then niche down into this sort of arbitrary demographic? Now, where I think that I could be wrong about this is that, let's just say for sake of argument, I did niche down. Would my cut through then be exponentially higher? So actually, I don't know if at the moment I might be underperforming badly with my cut through. That's possible. And maybe if I actually was a little bit more like, no, I'm for this person in this situation, da 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 da, maybe it would work better. So the problem is it's a counterfactual. I'm not. That's why I'm not 100% confident that it's the right thing to do. But I am confident, not for myself, but more broadly, that niching can be about that niching comes in different forms, and it's not necessarily something that you can literally like draw on some sort of segmentation piece of paper or whatever.
When you mention that, like the way that you describe from your side, and even like Liquid Death, both seem to align. Like it's, again, you're not going into like those demographics, etc., but it's more of like those values align, right? Like just telling you it's completely, but like focusing on like, hey, so these are our values, or say, for example, mission, or this is our manifesto. This is the plan, and seeing like who aligns with that.
I've always been much more into that than the more sort of functional form of niching. But it's like I'm open to be challenged on it, because I do think that like that kind of more sort of values manifesto, what we believe in kind of targeting, that is, generally speaking, I think that's quite a sort of big brand play. And it's probably a bit of a hangover from the world of, the golden age of advertising kind of thing, where, like what is the, Coca-Cola are not bloody segmenting themselves, and neither are, I don't know, Mercedes or whatever. I mean, they are, but, they aren't like, they're talking about, they've got a very broad church, right? So maybe it would be a mistake to apply that same sort of values-based targeting for a very small business.
Yeah, I mean, they're very established, right?
Yeah, and of course, like, they've got gigantic marketing budgets and small businesses don't. So yeah, it's no, you've really caught me in something where I have lack of confidence.
I think there's a lot to be really defined into that. And like the same thing for me, right? Like there's so much of that message out there of like, oh, you need to like niche down, like pick something super ultra specific, but then like don't niche down too much. It's just like so many different stories around that. And what I've really found, like even with the businesses that I've worked with, like it's always been like the values and that very that core that becomes like, this is what stands out, this is what draws people to you.
Well, I was going to ask, do you functionally niche, or do you only values niche?
I've been dabbling in a bit of both, actually, and that's what I was just about to go into. Is you're one of the few other people who also goes beyond the strategies and talks about implementing the idea around the strategy. Because I'm sure you've noticed, like there's a lot of, I mean, for me specifically, like there's a lot of like brand strategists who come in with a design background, whereas like I'm coming in from like that operations experience. So it's like knowing how to like, okay, how can we put this into like marketing? How can we get like HR to take this into like their hiring process, so that everybody who comes on board has like the, you're not hiring clones, but at least they get like that direction. That makes sense. So have you how have you found in terms of like going beyond the strategies, like, and implementing that into businesses?
Definitely. I mean, it gets more. I mean, it was a couple of years ago, even I was just like thinking, and this was before I was doing any like content or anything like that. I was just like, well, my job is to come in and give them the strategic direction and then say, off you go. And I thought, how hard can that be? But then what I noticed is that I would say under 30% of my clients executed in what I would call a remotely adequate way. Maybe some of them, it's not like they thought they did, maybe, but it was very unusual. And you start to realize more and more and more that is actually the strategizing bit is kind of like the easy bit. Not kind of easy because most people sort of don't really manage to do that either. But like, it's you're not, you sort of think, when I've figured out the strategy, I'm halfway there. So like 50% is figuring it out, 50% is implementing it. And that's wrong. It's more like 5% is figuring it out, 95% is implementing it, if you're to think of it as a whole. If you think about your journey to being a kind of strategically powerful, high leverage, high growth business, from the starting point to there, yes, like the development of the strategy comes very, very early in that process. So then, from my point of view, I think to myself, well, I don't have a very effective offer if I basically give people 5% of a solution.
Yeah, exactly. And that's such a big thing that you just mentioned there. Like, a lot of businesses, they get the strategy done, or they get like a strategy document, or like some ridiculous like long strategy document. And because we're founders, we're not going to have the time realistically to go through such a document. And even if you pass it on to somebody like, the chief operations officer or something like that, are they going to go through it? Are they going to understand it?
I mean, I would never really think of myself as being a founder, because I don't think that a solo consultant, which is what I sort of am/was, is a founder, because it's just you just going out there and just giving your advice. You're not a freelancer technically, but you're kind of like a glorified freelancer maybe. And but now recently I've been obviously trying to transition my business into being more of a business where I've got like more productized business, and like, so there's a machine behind it. So it isn't just like Alex Smith with a phone and an email account. There's a whole system in place, and other people, like, a team. And so since I've been doing that, and we're talking like I've only really been kind of like starting to push that in the last 4-5 months, maybe something like that. Now I see like, oh, this is what it's like to run a business. And I never knew. And I never had any, I couldn't really put myself in my client's shoes. And so, yes, you do sort of think to yourself, it's not so, it's not fucking hard to just like, just take this thing and implement it. And now I'm like, oh my God, it would be really hard.
Yeah.
And then now I got people giving me advice, and I'm like, and I just hear it and I just think, oh, well, that just sounds like a lot of work. And I've got all this other stuff that I need to do. And yeah, maybe I'll get round to it. Good idea. Yes, I need to do that. I agree. Yes, I need to do that. But, I'll get round to it. I wouldn't go so far as to say to people, to say to founders, don't take advice from someone who hasn't built something like you. For sure, you can get good advice from people who haven't built something. But now I can see that, oh, well, if they had done that too, then that's quite a bonus, because then they know what the kind of the grind looks like, as well as just oh, well, wouldn't this be a good idea? Well, just go and do it.
Oh my God, yes. I could not agree more. And okay, we're in this now. So what would you recommend to founders so that, you know, who say, for example, they have a strategy, they pass by like, you know, that part, and to not overcomplicate implementing it into their business?
You need to consider your business as being in a situation where you are either doing the strategy or you're not doing the strategy. And that's a binary line in the sand. And one day there'll be something an action that you take that will move you from not doing it to doing it. The way that you know whether you're not doing it or doing it is, would an external observer be able to kind of intuit what you're doing? So we can all look at, like, you know, Red Bull and Apple and whatever, and we don't need to read any internal documents. We know the gist of the game that they're playing, right? And that's because they are operating strategically, and they're really like, no, we are focused, we are doing this, and you get it, and the world responds. So that's what you need to be doing too. So you've only really crossed the dividing line from not doing the strategy, whatever it is, to doing it, when an external observer could figure it out, and you could almost say to them, you know, what's this company all about? What does this company offer? And they will just say back to you more or less what it is. In the same way, I'm sure that if you said to, I don't know, Red Bull what game they're playing, it wouldn't be the same words they use, but you'd all be more or less on the same page. So you then need to think about, okay, well, what is the bare minimum that we need to do in order to get there from where we are now? Let's say at the moment, we're not doing that. We've got this idea. We think, okay, if we really focused our company in on this thing here, then it will accelerate growth. Well, what is the bare minimum we need to do to get there? Of course, you can keep on pushing. You need to keep on pushing. You need to execute harder and harder and harder. But there's a bare minimum. And you need to figure out what that, it's not going to be more than 3 things, I would say. 3 changes to the business are. And those are the things to do. And you are well within your rights to expect results to improve immediately if you execute those 3 things. And depending on the nature of your business, you can actually test things super quickly. Like if you were, let's say, a service-based business, like a B2B service-based business, you're in the game of pitching. Probably you're doing your sales processes through in-person pitches. You're so lucky if you're in that situation, because there basically you can just rewrite your pitch deck before you've actually even really changed your business. You could sort of fake that you are kind of like doing these things that you aren't really doing yet. And you can just roll into the meeting. You can say any old crap you like and see how they respond. And if the pitch that falls out of your new strategic offering, get some positive response, you're like, oh, well, yeah, well then we'll go on with that. So you could also find ways to kind of like, you know, just do these little tests before you've gone all the way into execution. But yeah, generally you got to find the 2 or 3 things that are going to get you over the hump. And that's how you sort of, in theory, make it manageable. Almost invariably, one of those things will be like branding and messaging. So that's obviously quite a big job. But the plus side of that is that is the sort of job that most businesses outsource. So you won't necessarily have to do it yourself. I mean, maybe you would do it better. It's hard to find people maybe who will like nail it, because it's like quite a sort of Wild West kind
Right.
of thing. But yeah, like that will be one thing you have to do. And then there'll just be like a couple of structural internal changes where that will be the difference. Because yeah, like I say, you just think about it, like all your execution is going to come down to is, you know, your strategy is your unique value offer. It's the thing that the whole business is geared towards delivering. And then there are only 2 parts to that when it comes down to it. There's the question of, number 1, are you actually delivering this thing? Does the customer get this value that you're saying? And so you've just got to do whatever is necessary in order so as that they do get that value. And then are you communicating it clearly? And that's just like the messaging and branding thing. So delivery, communication. When you look at it that way, it isn't too bad, because you just look at your product and you just look at your messaging and you say, do both of these 2 things add up to that? So it's very, very simple. But of course, the changes that you need to make might be very annoying, long-winded changes. Changing a website is a fucking horrible job,
God.
right? So it's very easy for me to sit here and say, just change your website. But that takes companies like 6 months to change their website. So yeah, it's like very, very simple, but also I understand why people sort of screw it up.
And so, yeah, for what you're saying, right? Like, it's choose like three things, overarching things, three simple things, and then have like mini tasks. Okay, so between, say, for example, in operations, how can we make sure that it sounds like this? In the marketing, what are the main areas? Like, how can we make sure? And then like dividing that out between like, whatever the department, or like, what is the most important,
Yeah.
or what's going to achieve that perception the quickest, right?
Yeah, 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 exactly. And look, I mean, if you, it's tough because not everyone can be sort of Steve Jobs kind of thing. If you were a, if you were a kind of like a sort of a visionary, strategic leader, like there's a reason why people like Steve Jobs and Elon Musk and everything are like sort of very unusual and very controversial characters. Because if you want to know the way that, I would never say to a client, this is the way you should do it, because they're not gonna be this personality type, because almost no one is. But what you basically do is you have your people in the divisions of the company who are in charge of whatever they're in charge of, and you just basically start smashing them over the head with the strategy and pushing them and pushing them and pushing them and saying, no, it's this thing, it's this one thing, it's this one thing. What are you going to change in your function to go to this? And you're basically going to bully people individually into getting in line. And the combination of all those people getting into line is going to result in a fucking amazing business. The number one role of a founder or a leader, obviously after the business is a certain size, not if it's like a 2-person business or whatever, the number one role is they're just meant to be a propagandist. All they basically do, is they just walk around all day, every day, saying the same crap again and again until their team gets so sick of it. But it's so deeply embedded in their brains that the company goes in that direction. So this is not how most people operate, and this is why most people are not these people who we read about. Doesn't mean that you can't make an incredibly successful company, but it does mean that it's probably quite unlikely that you will create a kind of, cultural icon unicorn.
It's hard. I mean, like, it's the same thing. So say, for example, how you do your marketing, your messaging, that needs to also go like internally. And so speaking of
Yes.
speaking of the messaging, right? Like, I'm sure you might have had like the same thing where like a lot of business owners are like just focused on the messaging, like the exterior messaging, and it just became like it becomes so overcomplicated that you lose sight of like, hey, what was that original like strategy, that original direction, that essence, right? And I know you talk about this stuff.
They probably didn't lose sight of it. It probably just wasn't there in the first place.
Basically hire a good strategist.
In theory. I mean, it's all very I mean, that's an interesting point, because another thing to consider is that I strongly believe that strategy should not be a job. I think that strategy being a job is like, being a strategist as a job title is like being a communicator as a job title. To me, it doesn't make sense, because communication is just something that everybody has to do as part of, well, not everybody, but a lot of jobs, certainly a leader has to do as part of their job. So look, if I'm a leader, I'm not going to say, well, I can't really speak, so I'm going to hire a communicator to speak for me. Actually, to be fair, they do. I mean, if you're like the president or something like that, you've got speech writers I'm actually wrong about this. But anyway, at a sort of mid-level, it's not going to happen. You're not going to be like, yeah, like, oh, I can't communicate, so I'll just get someone to communicate for me. You just sort of think, oh, a leader needs to communicate. Well, strategy is the same thing. Like, the greatest strategists of all time were not strategists. They did not have strategy degrees. They did not have strategy qualifications. As far as I know, they knew, like, Steve Jobs didn't have an MBA, whatever. They knew nothing about it. But it's not like being a lawyer or a doctor. There's not a body of knowledge that you need to consume. Literally anybody on the street could be a better strategist than the dean of strategy at Harvard Business School. Categorically, you could pluck a random person from the street and they would be better at it. I mean, not the average random person, but there will be random people scattered about, because all it really is just like understanding, having a sort of sensitivity to a set of kind of principles, which the average person does not have a sensitivity towards. So you take like Steve Jobs or Elon Musk or someone like that, like they just sort of get it. So they're just sort of making those decisions without having to really think about it. Most people, they have to be kind of drilled into that decision-making process. And understanding, the kind of, you can boil it down to, I would say, maybe like 4 bullet points. All of strategy is just putting your thinking within the rails of like 4 bullet points. And some people have that like coded into them for whatever reason. And then 99% of people actually go in the direct opposite of those bullet points. And those people, then they can read a book about strategy and they can practice strategy and they can use frameworks, and it will push them in the direction of that behavior. But never forget that it is a behavior which, just like communication, you could learn it, you could get a speaking coach, whatever. Some people can just fucking do it.
It's very much like going beyond that, right? Like it's more of implementing it, which, like, we're jumping back again. Like it's not spoken about enough. Like that is that core. I mean, be it in like, the messaging, etc., like, or within the team, like, say even your manifesto, right? Like, and you've been talking a lot these days about manifestos and writing them up, like, going into, say, for example, if like, somebody's listening in now, like how would they go about writing like their manifesto? Maybe like give them some background around that.
Well, just to close the loop on what you're saying, one of those hypothetical 4 bullet points would be an extreme bias towards action and just instantly and positively doing stuff, whatever sort of random kind of ideas that you have, random or not random. That would be that would be one of them. So that's one of the areas where people are sort of like falling down. I mean, to be fair, the majority of founders probably do have that one covered, because if they're your sort of person who creates something in the first place, you probably are a doer at least. So like you've got one piece of the equation. Well, we were talking before about how you've got the external customer sales messaging. So you're like, okay, this business is all about whatever, and then here's my sort of sales script. Most businesses don't bother to write a sales script, which I think is a big mistake. I think every single business on the planet should have a sales script, not just ones that are literally selling like on the phone. I mean, you could tell me any business in the world, and a successful one, and you could break their pitch down into basically a sort of problem, solution, benefit structure, right? So there is no business that doesn't apply to. So you need to be able to do that. So everyone should do that as the sort of root of their external messaging. And then that can be converted into more creative articulations in branding and advertising and whatever, or like more sort of functional articulations in like pitch decks and things like that. It's the same story, you just tell it with different words. But then, as you say, when people look inside, they're not giving the same amount of attention to the comms internally. Now, of course, you communicate differently internally than externally because your team are not your customers. So you communicate to your customer in a way that matters to them. What does the customer want? And what do they care about? Everyone only cares about themselves. That's a big mistake that people make. They think that that's not true, but you got to be like, everyone only cares about themselves. So you talk about the customer in a way that speaks to their own ego, but you have to then talk to your team in the way that speaks to their ego. Yes, manifestos can bleed over into being external marketing pieces for sure. But the main function, I think, is that if you're thinking, all right, so we've figured out how to communicate and mobilize the customer, how can we communicate and mobilize the team? Manifesto is a good way of doing that, because there you're sort of like, you're telling them kind of like, the focus isn't so much on like, what are we delivering for the customer? The focus is more on, why does this matter? And kind of making people sort of like feel good about themselves. All of the Simon Sinek why stuff is, I know that people talk about it as an external thing, but primarily it's an internal leadership tool where, like, and Simon Sinek is a leadership expert. He's not, I don't know, people think of him as this sort of marketing guy, but really he's like a leadership guy. And obviously these two things are connected, but I think that's a mistake that people make. I think that why is a very, very dubious marketing tool, but a very, very powerful leadership tool. And so when you turn inwards and you're speaking to your business and you're trying to get them on board with the strategy, the focus is on like, this is what we believe in. This is why this matters. This is sort of what we're going to do about it, blah, 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 all that rah manifesto-y type stuff. If you put that out there to the customer, if you say, customer, this is what we believe in, I'm sorry, the customer's going to say, I don't give a shit. And who the fuck are you? And why do I care what you believe in? Right? This is why is a bad, not always, but mostly a bad marketing tool, because you're sort of because you're basically, it's a way of talking about yourself. But if you're talking to your team, the team are yourself. So then it's okay to talk about them, because you're talking about us. We in this room, we all believe this, don't we? Yeah, we all believe this. So, if you're like if you've a real genius level business, you have this kind of yin yang, inside outside messaging unit, which is the same thing in the core. It's the strategy, but you got the version which is about what the customer cares about, and you got the version which is what the team cares about, and it's all one thing. That is, you never see it.
That's a big one. I know, like, not many people are talking about, it's always why you're doing this, how you're going to do this, etc. Like, that's a very interesting point. And okay, closing out here, second last question. Is there anyone or any brand that inspires you, who's shaking things up? Because I know you've mentioned a lot of like really good international brands. So what would yours be? Brand or person?
Like a brand, like Nike or whatever. So I want to give you a like inspire. I mean, there are certainly lots of ones that I look at and say, "Oh, that's a good brand doing good strategy." Blah 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 blah. But if you're asking inspired, you're going to a kind of a higher level there.
I mean, doesn't that mean that they've already hit the good strategy part if they're inspiring you?
Oh yeah, totally. But I mean, I just think it's hard to think of anything that really inspires me. I suppose it's easier with people, isn't it, than like than brands. I don't know. It's an interesting question. Do brands ever, like, non-person based brands, like did Nike or Apple, or these sort of like ultra brands like that, did they ever really inspire people? I mean, they're as good as a brand can be, kind of thing. But like, are there really people out there who sort of like felt like, oh my God, I've just got to go and do this. I feel so alive and energized because of Apple. Maybe there is, but I question whether that's
I
a
mean,
thing.
there's the diehard fans, right? Like, you know how you were like when we started
I
this,
guess there
like, you
are.
know, you
Yeah,
were
yeah, yeah,
okay.
yeah.
I only have Apple, and I'm like, well, but okay,
Yeah. I mean, I buy all the stuff, but I'm definitely not like a diehard fan. But yes, no, I mean the sort of people who wait outside in lines for their new product launches and
right?
stuff. Okay, fine, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
How about people? How about like you know, because we know, right? Like the say for example, Gary Vee is like more popular, like or more well known than his brand, or like Richard Branson is more well. So like, how about a person then?
Well, it's going to be a very unsatisfying answer, and it makes me look very uncool, but I don't care. Like, I love Tony Robbins.
Really? Why?
He just knows his shit, and he just like and just. I mean, I went to. It's the only event of his that I've been to, but I went to Tony Robbins' Business Mastery quite recently in Florida. So he's got like a sort of business product in addition to the more sort of personal stuff that I guess he's more famous for. Because I'd listened to a couple of podcasts of his, business podcasts, and like, you know, he just, his material is great. He really knows his stuff. Like, it's unimpeachable, the quality of the material, I think. And so then, so I went there, and it's all about sort of working on your business, blah 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 blah. And yeah, I mean, you say inspired. I was just like, came out of that just so many ideas, so sort of brimming with confidence and optimism, and just ready to like fucking go and do it. And it's like, and the thing is that this is a wider point, but like, people in the UK and probably Europe in general will certainly be very, very cynical about something like, let's say, Tony Robbins. But it's not really about Tony Robbins. The thing is about cynicism more generally, that the American economy is just, regardless of whatever crazy stuff is happening in American politics or culture or whatever, the economy just plows on relentlessly, and the gap is getting wider and wider and wider between the United States and everywhere else in terms of like the economic factors. And the reason for this is a profound lack of cynicism and a real kind of like sort of go get 'em attitude, if you like, that a much higher proportion of people there have that sort of Tony Robbins-esque attitude. And then when I come back to the UK, like, I look around and I realize, like, there is not nobody, but relatively speaking, there's nobody here doing what I'm doing, trying to do what I'm doing. There's nobody here who's really kind of like building, making, working, doing this stuff. And whereas over there, it like felt like it was like every other person that you meet is kind of like got something going on, and they're kind of like, and they are pushing and building and trying to make that sort of upward, forward momentum. And I just think that this kind of like, the thing that is holding us back, I can only speak for the UK in particular, but I'm pretty sure it's true of like a lot of other places, is, you know, cynicism, which I'm as cynical as they come, and I've turned my nose up at all this stuff as much as anybody. But now I'm just like, I was just such an idiot. I was so wrong, because all that cynicism is, it's just fear. Like, if you, the thing that you roll your eyes at, the thing that you say, the thing that you sort of like look down your nose at, whatever that thing is, you know, that is the exact thing that you need to be doing, because that is the exact thing that you're afraid of. I'm going to give you a small example. Like, I was for the longest time, I was doing the like strategy consulting for like 7 years, or whatever, before I started posting on LinkedIn. And at any one of those times, I would have said, yeah, I don't want to be one of those fucking wankers who posts on LinkedIn. What losers, blah, 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 right? 100%. That's what I would have said. And in the end, I was just like, oh, well, I need to have a better top of funnel. So fine, I'll fucking do it. As long as nobody looks at me, maybe no one will ever know that I do it. You know, it can be my secret. that I'm posting on LinkedIn. And anyway, now my entire business is like bloody driven by LinkedIn. And so I look back at myself then, and how bloody stupid was I? And I thought that I was better than the people posting on LinkedIn. I thought I was better than the people who were earning millions and millions of dollars and building amazing communities and doing cool shit on LinkedIn. I thought I was better than them because, well, they're a loser posting on LinkedIn, whereas I'm really cool and I'm not posting on LinkedIn. So it's just like, who the fuck am I kidding? Right? Who am I kidding? And this is a disease. And getting on my high horse, it's a really bad English disease. And now everywhere I look, I'm just like, I can't stop seeing it. And I'm like, what are people doing? Because, it takes one to know one. And this is, very much me.
Yeah. No, like it's like growth is outside of that comfort zone, and usually it comes out as fear. And I think we've actually jumped into potentially the last question, like where every guest that I come on, I ask this question, and what the question is, it's what's that biggest societal norm that you want to push back on and teach others about? And it certainly sounds like that could be it.
Well, I'm glad that I just said that, because if I would have really struggled to answer that question if you just asked me it cold. I would have been thinking, what? I don't know how I would have answered that. But now that it comes off the back of that, then yeah, I would definitely say that, like, that's a. I wonder if I can give you a bonus one. I'll give you one that almost seems to just completely contradict that. I don't think this is a very important one, but it's just a little random one I was thinking about, and it's a bit of fun. But no, my real message is the other one. But this one is just like a bit of fun, which is, maybe it's just the circles that now I'm sort of moving in online or whatever. But I feel there's a lot of pressure on people to start their own thing and to, like, not be an employee. And I feel like there's this sort of subtle, almost like, oh, well, if you're still an employee working for someone, well, you must be a bit of a loser kind of thing. I mean, no one says that directly, but I feel like there's this sort of like subtle pressure out there. And yeah, I just like, I now, so obviously I'm not like an employee or whatever, but I look back and there are some things that are just so amazing about being an employee. Like, I was on the train the other day. This isn't a particularly good thing, but nonetheless, it just what made me think of it. I was on the train going out of London, and I was walking, and I was like, oh my God, I've got to do all this stuff. And on this train journey, I've got to get my laptop out, and there aren't tables, and I'm going to be having to do my work like this, blah, 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 blah. What's the next thing? What's the next thing? What's the next thing? All these people on the train, they're fucking sitting there watching TV on their phones and their iPads. They're watching TV shows. A couple of them reading a book, but most of them are watching Netflix. And I'm like, wow, imagine that you just walk out of that building and then you're like, all right, well, I've walked out of that building. Now this is my personal time. And I'm just going to watch a TV show on the train on the way back. And I was like, I cannot comprehend. I would never have a moment when on the train where I wouldn't think, oh shit, I've got to get this thing done. Because, it's, so I was like, that is nice. That is nice. And the other thing that's nice about it as well is that I think statistically, probably most people are essentially artisans. They're craftsmen. What they love is their craft. I mean, I know that, like, you can't sort of apply this easily to every job, but broadly speaking, like if you're, let's say, a designer and you love design, like, what do you want to spend your time doing? Do you want to spend your time honing your craft and designing? Or do you want to spend your time basically in sales and marketing mode for your design? Because, like, as a founder, 70% plus of your time needs to be spent marketing. Like, I did a post the other day, which I strongly believe in. If you're a founder, you're a marketer. The job description of founder is marketer, right? Founders are marketers above all else. And any other thing that they do is a very, very small part. Now, if you are a person who doesn't like the idea of marketing, that's totally cool. Then just don't be a founder, because luckily, if you go and work for a company, you can do the thing that you like and someone else will take care of the marketing. So if you're a designer, you can go and do the most beautiful, amazing design work, and you can hone your craft, and you can become the best designer in the world, and you can be like Johnny Ive and all the rest of it. And you don't have to go out there and just market the shit out of stuff. And I feel that like that's like an amazing thing if your heart is in a craft. And I think that most people's hearts are in a craft. And why would you ruin that by having to spend? I do very little strategy. Right? All I do is marketing all day long. I don't really do strategy. It's like 10% of my time.
Exactly. Like going deeper into that, like, okay, this is not necessarily like the easy, like, you choose what works for you, and neither is worse than the other. Thank you so much for coming on, Alex. Appreciate it. And you can connect with Alex through the deets in the podcast show notes. Thanks for listening to the Art of Branding podcast. A great way to support more people to create their own badass brand is dropping a 5-star review, and Brady shifts your business from just another to the obvious one. Visit Badassery by B to get started. Let's freaking go.
Time for bloopers. Yay!
Yeah, like it happened like twice, and then now like it's gone away. But there will be some video, so if you could kind of come a bit closer to the camera, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, no anything expensive.
Okay, I mean, Samsung and like a few other things can be expensive as well. Like,
True.
and probably slightly less glitchy.
Yes.